Where does your morality come from? If your answer to that question is Slate.com, then I think it's time to consider the possibility of getting yourself a lobotomy. Let's have a conversation about Slate. I went to Slate.com yesterday and this is what I saw. 7 out of the 9 featured stories are Trump derangement nonsense. Of the 2 stories that aren't about Trump, one is entitled, "I Think I Spend Way Too Much on Porn." Now, this YouTube channel disavows the spanking of any monkeys. We get it though. We're well aware that there are pornos on the interwebs. If you have a major problem with spending too much money on internet porn, it begs a question. What the fuck is wrong with you? Of course, Slate's ace team of journalists are prepared to help those with problems like this. Are you spending more money than you should? Brilliant observation. Just brilliant. Now, a sane person might suggest that this person get a hobby. Perhaps he ought to consider exercising more. Maybe try and go on actual dates with real women. Or at the very least, just stop spending money on porn. That's how a non-insane person would try and help this guy. Here's Slate's actual advice.
If you are getting everything else done, and only spending what you can actually afford, then you are probably okay.
No matter what, you getting blessed by the best. Watch that lip, son. The leaders in the best.
Work shitty job. Send residual income to e-girls. Missing input. Profit.
Hello, Slate. I spend enormous amounts of cash on booze. In a drunken stupor, I often forget to pay my bills. My interest rates are absolutely insane. I'm worried I may be spending way too much on the hooch.
If you are getting everything else done, and only spending what you can actually afford, then you are probably okay.
Fantastic. If you think that this advice column is getting any better, don't kid yourself. The next person seeking Slate's sage advice is in desperate need of some help. He wants to Egg McMuff his wife, but the odor's a problem. He speculates that this may be due to the fact that his wife showers only once every 3 days. Now, my first thoughts on this is an obvious troll. There's no way that this was a real question asked in good faith. But then I remembered that Vosh has over 100,000 subscribers. Now, a non-insane person should be able to solve this guy's problem. You don't need to have read the Nicomachean Ethics in order to answer this question correctly. But here's Slate's answer. Have your wife examined by a medical doctor. Now, Slate constantly tries to tell people who they ought to vote for. Yet why should we listen to them? They can't even figure out how to wash themselves. I guess Jonathan Haidt was right about the left having no conception of the moral foundation of sanctity or cleanliness. Or is washing your ass considered a white privilege now? Of course, these last 2 questions are nothing compared to this one. I think my teenager may be in a polyamorous relationship. I'm worried that she's too young for this sort of thing. If you as a parent have no idea what a proper relationship ought to be like, how can you expect your children to? Primitive hunter-gatherers were capable of advising their children on the proper forms of human relationships. The fact that we can't even do this anymore shows just how much our culture has devolved. We're human beings trapped in a subhuman animal culture. One that rejects even the most rudimentary notions of human wisdom. So how young is too young? Well, this woman's daughter is described as being almost 17, which of course means that she's 16 years old. The woman explains that she apparently walked in on her daughter disentangling from 2 male friends in the basement laundry room. Now, one thing that this letter doesn't mention is what's the perspective of the father. I'm guessing that's because he's out of the picture. Most dads aren't going to allow their daughter to entertain multiple teenage boys alone in the basement. This advice column expertly demonstrates why fathers matter. Now, it ought to be obvious to everyone that no parent should want this for their 16-year-old daughter. If some guy doesn't respect himself enough and doesn't care about your daughter enough that he's okay with other men having sex with her, he's not the type of guy you want hanging around your daughter. Now, most of you have probably heard about this, but it's worth bringing up. In the past, the media has tried to glamorize this type of polyamorous relationship, focusing on specifically this relationship that existed between one woman and 4 different dudes. Now, this was supposed to be the newest iteration of the LGBT lifestyle. Unsurprisingly, though, it ended in a tragedy. After this woman was knocked up by one of the men and gave birth, her child was shaken to death by one of the other men. But other than that, yeah, I'm sure this must have been such a loving family. Of course, Slate's expert journalist finds no issues with this relationship. It might not be normal to you, the author writes, but it's totally normal from the perspective of your daughter. Because that's exactly how a relationship between a parent and child should be. The child is the one who teaches the parent what their moral values ought to be. Here's a radical idea. If your common sense tells you that your child is doing something self-destructive, why don't you do something about it? Don't let your kids use drugs, stay out late at night, party with adults, or be alone with a couple of teenage boys in the basement. It is the parent who ought to be the one leading the child, not the other way around. Also, why are you asking Slate for advice? What possibly leads you to conclude that Slate would be a good moral teacher for yourself and your child? It's bad enough you have to ask other people how you're supposed to raise your own child, but of all the people you could pick, Slate is possibly one of the worst. I mean, seriously, why would you ever go to a journalist for moral advice? I could see going to a clergy member or even a philosopher. I could even see reaching out to someone with a lot of hard life experiences. Perhaps a police officer or an emergency room nurse. A journalist, though? No way. I guarantee you if this woman were a police officer or a nurse working at a busy hospital, she wouldn't be asking about this. She'd already know. It turns out, though, that shitty advice columns are not the only way Slate spreads its misinformation. It also has its own YouTube channel. Now somehow, despite having 200 times the number of subscribers as my YouTube channel, Slate manages to receive about the same average views per video as my channel. Here's my message to Slate. If you want to rack in those e-bucks, why don't you just hire me? I promise you I can get more than 0.5% of your subscribers to click on my videos. All you have to do is give me total editorial control over the content I produce. The other thing that's hilarious about Slate's YouTube channel is that over the last month, Slate has published nothing but Black Lives Matter propaganda. Now, this is the stuff YouTube prominently features in its continuing the conversation section. You know, that one that it spams every single person's YouTube page with? I said this is funny because just look at how many views these videos are getting. Almost no one actually watches this garbage. Sorry, Slate, but nobody wants to watch an hour-long woke stream where some old black lady talks about pornos she's been in.
And then I shot like maybe 2 or 3 scenes of me lactating, which is also like a huge fetish. And that was pretty stupid too. It was like squirting breast milk on a Twinkie on somebody's pussy. Like, you know, like really stupid shit, you know? But it was just interesting that back then, the way that the pregnant woman's body was honored in a way that they would pay you more money, but at the same time, it was done in such a way that wasn't really about the woman herself. Like it wasn't this like mother goddess image. You know, we're not doing 10 positions in 20 minutes the way it looks like on a clip, on a porn site. It's, you're shooting, you're changing positions, you got to get water, you got to go pee. The guy's got to stroke his dick in the bathroom. Like, there's a problem with the light, the camera battery dies. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's all kinds of other things that are happening.
Seriously, this hour-long live stream got only 6 chats the entire video. There's not even a single comment. It's honestly one of the boringest things I've ever watched on YouTube. And believe me, I've watched some boring YouTube content. If your goal is to make yourself dumber, then consume Slate's content. Read their never-ending supply of Trump derangement articles. Listen to their horrible advice columns. Watch their terrible Black Lives Matter YouTube content. The mistake so many people make, though, is to trust what Slate is saying to them. They're not experts on ethics. They're not experts on politics. They don't even have a coherent conception on right versus wrong. They're nihilists who would happily sacrifice your family's happiness for some vague conception of progressive politics. Too many Americans learn about morality from the TV or internet. The media have never been, and never ought to be considered, a moral teacher. If you enjoyed this video and you're not subscribed to my channel, please support small YouTube channels like mine by subscribing. Thanks.